Night Watch listeners, Scarlet Knights fans, it's that time again. The season is upon us. This week, we have a night kickoff Thursday against Ohio. And I've got a special treat for you on Night Watch. We're all doing the rounds with all the shows, and you guys have all your favorite podcasters and whatnot. So I've got two of the best. Mike Broadbent and David Anderson are with me, and got feeling. Mike got muted. Don't know why. Technical difficulties to start the year. But we're off. How are you guys feeling?
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited. Game week, finally. It feels like the summer was just like a kind of a blur, and now we're already, in a shortened week. So excited to, a lot of content, like you said, coming out this week.
Yes, sir. Labor Day. When I think about the summer, it was the dog days. But when I think about Memorial Day to Labor Day, it flew by. And I'm like, what the hell happened? Time for some RU football. Let's dive right into it because everybody knows, if you're a hardcore fan out there, you kind of know the schedule, you know the team a bit. Let's talk about the schedule this year. Front loaded at home if you're one of the people that goes to a lot of the home games like I am, but a lot of later night kickoffs and backloaded as far as difficulty, really rough. But I want to touch on something that I noticed about early on in the season that I think is going to become a trend under Schiano. We know his scheduling philosophies. This year, unlike the past few years, there's no ACC opponent early in the year. And last couple of years, you had a runway, right? You had a few teams that you expected to beat. And then you had an ACC team that you think you should beat, but it's a little more challenging. And it might have some traditional, significance, like Virginia Tech certainly did. What's your guys' thoughts on the fact that it doesn't look like we're going to be scheduling or having this year we're not, and in the future, what's your take on not having that ACC, power conference or second tier conference opponent? Mike, go first.
Well, I think you don't really need the resume building element that you do if you're expected to be like a Rutgers team where you're just trying to get to a bowl game each year that you would need for like college basketball. So I'm totally fine with it. It was cool to play teams that, were, from the heyday of the Big East, like Virginia Tech getting some much needed, revenge for how they used to beat on us. And same thing for, Miami, which was obviously a bowl game, but Boston College and things like that. Honestly, like I'm fine with the Schiano approach that he's openly talked about where, he said that basically this year's schedule is kind of what it's going to be moving forward. Now, will that change, with the advent of a possible SEC Big Ten challenge in the future? I don't know, but I'm totally fine with it. Like, they're kind of a very, low reward, high risk type games to begin with, like playing, like you can't really risk an out of conference loss. And Schiano has proven to be very good in the out of conference. But I'm fine with not having an ACC game on the schedule, honestly.
Dave?
Yeah, Mike brings up a good point about the resume building, especially if the college football playoff expands. It's not really going to make any sort of impact, like even it might have in a 12-team field. But to me, the bigger thing is I think that they were ready last year for that Washington game because of how emotional and tough that Virginia Tech game was right before that. And when I look at Iowa's a traditionally slow starting team, but they always play Iowa State early on in the season. And they learn a lot about their team, even if they lose that game. And, how many times did they go 8-4, but they lost to Iowa State, which looked bad in the moment, but it may have helped them figure their team out. I mean, we see this with basketball a lot, but I think it's even more of a big deal in football because there's just so many aspects to the operation. And so I see the advantage to it, but also for a Rutgers team that, they're going to learn enough about their team playing against MAC teams, whereas if you're Ohio State, you might not. So I think for where Rutgers is right now, I think that it's fine, even though, to your point, I enjoy the nostalgia element of playing against these teams, Syracuse, Boston College, that I grew up watching them play every year and often coming in second in those games.
Yeah, and so with that being said, Dave, I believe it might have been you, Mike, on TKR. I've listened to so much content in the last 2 weeks, it's hard for me to parse out. But Somebody was saying, that they kind of missed the regional rivalries and the way college football was, where you had, obviously the backyard brawl, you preserve some things, but from an analytical, strategic standpoint, I hear both of your points, i.e., we don't need the resume builder. The team's going to have plenty of challenges with the Big Ten schedule, especially with the bolstered conference now. But from a fan enjoyment perspective, do we lose anything there with these? We got revenge on Vatek, kind of. We got revenge in the bowl game against Miami. You could still have bowl game revenges, but do the fans lose anything without that other game there in the beginning?
Oh, I totally think the fans have kind of lost a lot of not the passion for college football, but for example, like I don't have any coworkers who went to Oregon at my office, but I did have people who went to Virginia Tech, and I think a lot of people have that kind of, especially working in the New York area, where you have those kind of like rivalries. Maybe your friend's dad went to Boston College or something. There's always something lost when you lose that regional connection, especially when you have history going back decades. So I think the fans do lose a huge bit of tradition and kind of what made the game special. And I think that's kind of, college football was one of those things that remained static for so long in a world that was changing very quickly. And now college football has changed dramatically in the last, let's call it 15 years, maybe a little bit longer, more than it probably has in the previous 100. So yeah, I think fans have lost a lot and are trying to come to grips with that a lot, with how things are now.
Makes sense.
100% agree with Mike on that. I mean, it's the coolness of the regional rivalry. They have more fans that can come to the game, might take a road trip, especially with Rutgers being close to New York. A lot of those schools, sure, yeah, Oregon is going to have, some people in New York, but not as many as Boston College or Syracuse or even Virginia Tech. One of the cool things about living here in Charlotte is you've got all of that all the time. North Carolina, Duke, Clemson, South Carolina, Wake, North Carolina State, and then even Virginia Tech is only about 2.5 hours away. And so I think the ACC is, and maybe the heart of Big Ten, like the quadrangle teams, they still have a little bit of that heart of their like experience, that at least they have some of those games on their schedule. Whereas Rutgers in a year like this doesn't have any. The closest thing, I guess, is Maryland, which is not really a traditional rival. And there's just something to be said for those games. We talked about it with the future of college athletics, and we didn't even get to the end of that about if this ends up in a full-blown soccer club model, which will make it even worse. But, yeah, I mean, I think something is lost there, unfortunately, with how this all works.
Yeah, I understand that, and I agree with it. It's kind of just an interesting adjustment in general. So, look, I understand from a strategic standpoint. Same time, Big Ten, you have some, especially if you're in that professional world. I remember when we beat Michigan 2014, I was clerking, with a guy who went to Michigan law school, and we had a little rivalry, and my brother made a bet with somebody at his New York finance firm. So we still have some of that, but I miss the regionality quite a bit, and I think it'll be a continuing adjustment, but strategically with the way that things stack up in the Big Ten, I just think I understand why Shiano's doing it. Staying on that schedule, we've had in the Big East, we had a lot of memorable Thursday night games, a lot of night kickoffs. You have a lot of these traditionalists, which I didn't even really know was a thing, only kind of vaguely that it was a thing in the Big Ten. Hey, I love noon kickoffs, just that's when college football is played. As I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate noon more than I used to as a kid, and I wanted to just be out tailgating all day. I still think 3:30 is my sweet spot, just from a fan, TV, everything perspective. Mike, you're at a lot of games. David, you're out of state. We're doing Thursday kickoffs now in the season openers, and this schedule, usually I get September, just nonstop front-loaded September games. If they're all at noon in the heat, I feel like we lose some of that fall atmosphere. But this year, a lot of later kickoffs. Thoughts in general on the traditionalism, fan experience, how it is for Rutgers? What are your thoughts on these night games and these late kickoffs? Dave, go first.
Yeah, I really felt like the Thursday night kickoff in the Big East was cool because it was the game of the week in a sense. And so that gave it a little bit of extra juice. So the Big Ten's trying to rob a little bit of that with these Friday night games, but I think a lot of that is more what is appropriate scheduling quirk. For example, Rutgers has Washington on a Friday night because Rutgers is coming off a bye and they have to travel cross country. So it was a logical choice to put that game in the Friday night spot. But that's not necessarily going to be, I mean, we hope that it's the biggest game of the week in the Big Ten. But really, when Rutgers would play a lot of those games now, I do remember the 50-3 whooping by Syracuse, but where Rutgers had a Thursday night. But usually, if those were the marquee games. And so that gave it a little extra oomph. In terms of 12 o'clock kickoff, as a former student and younger person, noon on a Saturday can be brutal. As an adult, it's great. I mean, even with my kids now, I never understood why churches had like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock service. And now, I mean, like knock down the door at 6:30. By 8 or 9 o'clock, you got to get them out of the house, no matter what you're doing, taking them to the pet store or whatever, something. So I do think, yeah, to your point, Larry, as you age, it changes a little bit. But I think if the games are done strategically, it's fine. But I'm like you, I prefer for a run-of-the-mill game to just be Saturday. Again, I like that 3:30 spot. I liked when they used to do 2:30. I thought that was better. But yeah, noon or even 3:30 is really the ideal for now, I think, if you can. But again, like a big Washington game like last year, maybe the Iowa game this year, the Iowa game in 2022, those were awesome. And if they can recapture that against the Iowa this year, that kind of goes to something we've all been talking about like people want to go to those games. It's an event. And so if done strategically, it's okay. But I agree. I think college football is for Saturday afternoons in general. What about you,
Dave? Before I go to Mike too, you said what I was going to segue into before turning to Mike anyway, which was this Iowa game. We had Washington last year. It sets up Rutgers really well for a marquee night matchup. Mike, what are your thoughts on when Rutgers is trying to re-galvanize a fan base and also attract casual fans or people who maybe haven't been as engaged or who haven't been to the stadium in a while? Talk about these night games and in general, also the Iowa game and the Washington game last year. How important is that for Rutgers?
Oh, I mean, they're huge. Like the Big East was like a really pioneer, like David was saying, of those Thursday night games. And like, it was one of like the few things they did right over the final few years of the existence of the conference. It was so successful that the NFL just stole Thursday night for the rest of eternity by putting those Thursday night games on there. And then they've kind of expanded their schedule even more over the years. But I mean, there is a palpable difference in the crowds at night games for Rutgers, especially ones where Rutgers isn't out of it yet. You know, there's been a few over the years that like, a Thursday game a night game in November where, Rutgers isn't going to make a bowl and it's kind of a pointless endeavor. But like the games that matter and are night games, especially when it's decent weather, I mean, those atmospheres are night and day difference in terms of the crowd and the excitement. And those noon games, while they might be great for like the average fan, people bitch and moan about, students not getting there in time. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of colleges around the country who have a lot easier experience for their students getting to the stadium. Whereas Rutgers, like, it is a journey to get to the stadium for most students. Like, most students don't live on Bush. So it's, you're taking a bus and you're waiting in line. And, why a lot of the kids like have the mindset of like, why would I go do this whole adventure when I could just, get hammered in the backyard in College Ave and listen to it on the speakers. But, in regards to like, how do you galvanize a fan base that is kind of in the most attention grabbing area in the country for sports and everything? I mean, you got to win. Like, that's the bottom line is they'll come, like those casual fans will only be won over with winning. And until we regularly get back on that winning train, like, you're not going to get the average casual. Like, it just is what it is. Like, sure, the profile has grown for Rutgers as, they haven't been the worst team in the Big Ten the last few years, but until you like have those moments that you can point to, like Louisville 06 or USF 07, like when you see those viral moments, like, especially in today's day and age, those clips will reverberate throughout the landscape of social media. Like, people want to be a part of excitement, and Rutgers hasn't really had a whole lot of excitement outside of basketball, honestly, in the last, decade. So
And speaking of excitement and speaking of these night games, Rutgers has another crack this year. I mentioned it, just like Washington last year, who did win that, kind of a fluke game. Mike, I think you were the one talking about the percentages and the winning percentages. Rutgers was all the way at the bottom until – look, Iowa's an opportunity. And every year that we play Iowa, there's usually talk about their offense is anemic. They have a great defense. If Rutgers could just get a little bit ahead and put them in a position where they can't claw out of it, Rutgers is going to have a good shot. With how backloaded and how difficult the schedule stacks up to be this year, if Rutgers doesn't win that game, how devastating will that be to the season? Now, I'm not talking about season expectations overall and all that. We'll get to that. But from a season win and loss perspective, how much is lost if you can't pull off that massive home night game against Iowa week 4? Mike, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously like the litmus test for the season, in my opinion, on how things could and maybe will go. I think Iowa, by a lot of our fans, might be underrated right now because I think they do finally have a decent quarterback in Gronowski, transfer from San Diego or South Dakota State. But I think it compounds itself because the following week we play at Minnesota, who has every reason to want to get revenge on us, and they're coming off a bye. So there's going to be a net rest disadvantage for Rutgers there. And then you go out to Washington after a bye the following game. So it really kind of gets gnarly really quick. And so if you can find a way to beat Iowa, maybe you've kind of like had that gut check moment and your season might go on a different path. Whereas if they don't win, I think it kind of might, I don't know, be the canary in the coal mine for how the rest of the year might go. Because Iowa up front is really tough. I mean, if you look at Bruce Feldman's freak list, I think like 2 of the top like 15 guys are Iowa offensive linemen from that list. And they have a third guy, one of their linebackers on that list as well. So they have legit dudes in the trenches. So I think it'll be a good test for Rutgers in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Good test for the fans too. I got to get loud, and again, just my age. I'm not as loud as I used to be, and I got to galvanize people. Anyway, Dave, your take on the same question.
Yeah, I think that I'll actually give credit to the NJ.com writers when they were talking about this in the like the fork in the road game, and a lot of times it's not so early. But I remember it was that game against Boston College where Art Sikowski threw a pass. Raheem Blackshear had a really nice run. And then Mike Maietti like punches Art Sikowski in the head and like almost knocks your QB out after a touchdown. Mm-hmm. And that game was properly diagnosed as a huge fork for that season. And Rutgers pretty much just fell apart after that, even though they were somewhat competitive in that game. I mean, I think it was like 30-16, but it was closer than that earlier on until like very late. But my concern more is the emotional road of that, like a home game at night. You're going to have the juices flowing. You lose that game, and it really takes a lot out of you. And to Mike's point, you're going to be going to a Minnesota team that really feels like they outplayed you last year, and they lost, which is probably true. And early in the season, Rutgers has this doesn't have like Rutgers has better depth than they've had, but Iowa over the course of the season just grinds down opponents because they usually have more depth. So you have that more in your favor playing them early in the year than late in the year. So Rutgers has a lot of these advantages or less of a disadvantage than they did in the 2023 game when things were tough coming off of that, Ohio State near victory. So I think the canary in the coal mine is a good way of looking at it, because even if they lose by 1 point, or it just might have negative consequences throughout the course of the season because you just don't have that extra one in the win column, and instead it's a loss. And then, if you go in a tailspin like we saw the team last year, and let's say you're 3-3, that you're in deep trouble. Now we've seen them get off the mat before, so I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibilities, but that is a make or break stretch between Iowa, Minnesota, and Washington.
Yes. Yeah. I think I completely agree. I think this, and by the way, canary in a coal mine, I had to look that up a few weeks ago because I always heard it. I loved it. I didn't know what it meant. Now I actually do. So, I guess Pennsylvania, Ohio folks out there, they definitely know what that means from the history. But anyway, we're using that and I love it. Speaking of the fragility of the season, speaking of expectations for the season, we keep referencing 1 year ago, 2 years ago. And Dave, I heard you on Aaron's podcast this morning on the Scarlet Faithful talking about the fact that, look, we're not judging on a curve anymore, right? We're not grading on a curve. This is not 2020. This is not, 21. This is now you're knee deep, to say the least, into Shiano 2.0. You are a Big Ten school. You've been a Big Ten school for over a decade. We talk about trajectory. We analyze things in terms of trajectory. You build a program, right? You try to get over humps. I'm one of the people that thought last year was a golden opportunity given the schedule to really, and when I say get over the hump, I'm not talking about necessarily making a run in the college football playoff. I'm talking about more of a marquee bowl, beating teams you should beat, a real step up in wins and losses. We all know what happened with Illinois in the timeout. I think that was a huge opportunity. So now going forward, I want to ask you both. I'll start with Dave. I'll go to Mike, and feel free to jump in with each other. Given the toughness of the schedule, and now I think the offense might take a step up. Maybe the defense takes a step back. That's not even talking about questions along the offensive line. What is the expectation year over year now for Rutgers? Are we expecting, and I already know the cliche, nothing is up in a straight line. It starts and stops, and that's a Shianoism too. But what is our realistic what makes this season successful? And going forward, what do we really hope to see as far as progression from this program realistically? And then I want to hear your personal thoughts, and we can reiterate it in a minute. But, as a fan, what is it you want to see from this program? I mean, is it really national championships? What is it, and what do you expect to see? So this season and then going forward. Dave, I'll start with you.
What I want is what everybody wants. No, I'm just kidding. The Stallone monologue. No, what I would like to just see is that you go into games almost every week feeling like this. I'm not loathing as soon as this first drive happens and it's like Rutgers fumbles in their own territory and they're down 7-0. Like, I just don't want that. I just want to be able to go into most games feeling like, yeah, we can win, should win. And against a lesser team, we should win. Against a comparable team, there's a good chance it's worth watching what will actually happen in this game. And then that occasionally you upset somebody big and like it's one of those things that we remember. That's what I would like. And I think that's probably where this team is going to be over the next couple of years. In terms of record for this season, I think if you go 6-6, you're at least holding serve in that sense. Because you have 3 non-group of non-power 4 teams on your schedule, that means you really got to take care of the business in those games. And you only have to win 3 of your remaining 9 games. So, yeah. And if you want to say you got 3 of the premier teams, then you only got to win half. And I think that's enough for people to want to keep going to games and feel like it's an important part of their Saturday, whether they be attending or watching on TV. But that's what most fans, I mean, I've lived all over the country at this point, and that's what most fans outside of, your Columbus, Ohio or Baton Rouge, Austin, Texas. So I lived there kind of for a while. Like, yeah, obviously they want national championships, but for most of everybody else, like they know that they just want it to be a fun Saturday and a thing to look forward to. And that's really what I hope Rutgers can have, like all these other places I've been. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think you put it well this morning where, holding serve's a great way to describe it, where like success this year especially is fairly binary to me. Like 5-7 would be a not successful season. 6-6 would be, because you're not trailing backwards, and you're making a bowl. Anything above 6-6 I would see as pretty successful, because a 6-6 season implies that you probably have at least one, at least relatively small upset for
right.
Rutgers in the win column, which is kind of what we've all been clamoring for. Like, for example, I don't think there's a fan in the Rutgers fan base who wouldn't take a 6-6 if you say you're going to start 2-1 this season with a loss against one of the MAC teams, but you're going to beat Illinois or Iowa, and I'm saying Iowa because I think they'll be ranked by the time they play at Rutgers, especially if they win their first 3 games. If you get a ranked win, I think any Rutgers fan would take that. And that's kind of what we're hoping for. Like, now that we have a team that has an offense that is at least, middle of the pack for the Big Ten, like while progress isn't always linear, the band of, upside or ceiling gets significantly higher when you have an offense that can at any point kind of, have a explosive play that maybe we didn't have the ability to do a few years ago outside of the run game. So I do think that our ceiling outcome is significantly higher because we're going to be an offensively led team this year. So I'd love to see, some big plays. And David, I heard you shout out Scarlet Road for talking about whether or not Rutgers is a Big 12 team. Like if they play like a Big 12 team and they can, win a shootout 41-36, like that they really couldn't do, but they've proven they could do it the tail end of last year, and they can kind of put that together on a consistent basis. Like I don't see why there isn't a reason they couldn't pull a big upset. But again, it's easier said than done. And 3 of those top ranked teams are in the top 7 and likely playoff candidates or playoff teams this year. So I wish that we were playing more of the middle class of the top 25, because there is such a huge difference between those top 10 teams and the top 25 teams. So while beating a team with a number next to their name is always fun, it's so much easier to beat a team like Kansas State or Iowa State than it is to beat a team like Penn State.
Yeah, I agree with both of you and what you're saying. And then speaking in terms of that, we want upsets once in a while. We want the big victory. We want respectability. We want to enjoy the season, being competitive every game. As an end goal, I mean, are moderate bowl wins, racking them up, putting them in the Hale Center, is that enough? Do we want playoff berths, and how often? Because if we never have a chance, and that's another TKR shout out. You guys are talking about the proposed, which we know is kind of just a bluff, that the massively expanded playoff. But a lot of those teams that get those berths aren't really going to have a chance. Do we want to be a perennial? Of course, the answer is yes, but that's assuming you're actually competitive. I mean, is that okay to just be racking up bowl victories? Do we want a New Year's bowl? Everything's different than it used to be, right? So those bowls aren't, I guess they are significant still. You're going to be part of the college football playoff, but are we cool with that? And should most teams and fans be cool with that? Or do we think there's some chance that, because you got to remember now the momentum changes, right? It used to be, well, you rack up wins, you start attracting top tier talent, you get kids to stay home. But now we're going national with recruiting. There's money involved. What say you regarding that? Say this year, I agree with you, by the way. 6-6 bowl game, get a bowl win. I'm going to be very happy with this year. Going forward, is it schedule dependent, right? Like last year, does it say, hey, a moderate bowl is not good enough this year because we should have had 8-9 wins? What is it? Is that good enough? What do you guys think? Either one of you can take it.
Well, I think the expanded playoff thing was, I think, a leverage play to get the SEC to expand their conference schedule. Right. And it looks like it worked. They've already kind of, they've already They've already capitulated there. So they're going to go to 9 games, I think, next year. But I think for most fans, like, especially if you want to like draw in more casuals, you need to have, I think, every 5 to 10 years, a team that into November is in the discussion, where Rutgers, if they have a path to make the playoff, if X, Y, and Z happens, or they're ranked, heading into Halloween or something like that. Otherwise, like, I think just being competitive and not having those, 78-0 blowouts happen. Because even last year, like, I think we largely avoided it, but we still did have that Wisconsin game that I think left a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth, because that should not have happened. Like, sure, a lot of bad things happen, but we just can't have those regular blowouts anymore. And I think they've gotten significantly more infrequent. But if we're losing 2 to 3 games a season by 40 plus, like, you're going to, first of all, get a lot of ridicule, because Rutgers is always going to be graded on a scale for the average fan, where it's just like, oh, typical Rutgers. Like, until we continuously win, like, any loss like that on the season, it's like, yeah, but you're still Rutgers. So once we can firmly get away from the blowout losses, start getting some wins that people are talking about again, I think that's kind of what we're all hoping for. Now, will it happen? I don't know. I think we're positioned well with the leadership currently at the school. Kelly Zinn did her first media scrum today, and just from hearing what was said there, I'm very optimistic. She seems to get it in terms of the role she's trying to fill. But generally, like, I don't know. I just want to be in the national conversation late in the season, once every 5 to 10 years, to sum it up.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mike, about the casuals versus not. Like, there's two ways to get more casual fans. One is you have a big year and it becomes an event and people show up. The other way is just by pure attrition, grinding, that you're 6-6, 7-5 every year, and every generation of students comes through those turnstiles and it's a part of their life. And then gradually they get married, they have their next door neighbor they bring to the game. Like, but that's a much tougher way of doing it. It's doable, but that's much tougher than the, flash season where it's like, this is memorable outside of just, you don't have to, if you live in Heightstown or whatever, I'm sure you know people who went to Rutgers, but you might not know a Die Hard.
Yep.
And you're like, I'll check it out, or I'll bring my 9-year-old kid to a game because like this may be something, right? Like, I've lived in all these places and I'm not a fan of like the Atlanta Hawks when I lived there, but if they had a good year or LeBron James coming to town, I'm going to take him to the game. But that only goes a certain way if you're bringing Ohio State in and losing 49-7 in a night game. Like, Mike, you pointed out the night game fails. Like, that was one that was just like, what are we doing, people? Like, why are we all watching this on national TV? It was awful. So that's kind of where I guess I'm losing sight of even your original question, Larry, but it's like to actually keep the momentum going in this modern landscape of college football. I think it all harps down to the pandemic and how people realized that you can replicate a lot of things at home on watching TV, but you can't replicate a concert. You can't replicate a big sporting event. You can't even replicate a political rally, a good one, or even a big church gathering. Like, all these things are not, people crave that. And as we live in this digital world, like, if you can deliver that, if you can deliver even a Michigan 2014 game when they weren't even that good, but people storm the field, it's a last second block kick. Like, that might have not been the same if Rutgers won 28-14, but because it came down to the last sequence and all the drama, like, people will be talking about that forever. And so I think that's what you have to try to capture. And we talk about like signature wins versus not. It doesn't necessarily have to be a signature win will do that, but sometimes there's games that aren't, but are just memorable and awesome that, people harken back to that. Like, yeah, we should go to the game this Saturday, or I'm going to tell my brother who's coming in from Pennsylvania to come a little earlier on Saturday so that we can go to the game rather than just, go to a bar at night or something. So all those things matter. And I think, to Mike's point, I think Kelly Zinn really gets that. It's not that she's going to just try to reproduce what she saw at West Virginia or at LSU, but that this is a slightly different animal. Don't throw everything out, but try to figure out like what works for Rutgers. What can she take from her experiences at all these places and have it work here?
Makes sense. And so to actually, and I agree with you about Kelly Zinn, I'm encouraged by it. I'm more encouraged, to be honest with you, by the fact that she seems to have a more nuanced understanding of Rutgers in particular and has a plan as to how she's going to implement the things she's learned and the things she knows to make Rutgers work, as opposed to, the Chris Ash model of things. I'm going to plop this model from this other school right on Rutgers and it's just going to work. She seems to actually appreciate the nuance and uniqueness of Rutgers. So that encourages me quite a bit. That's macro stuff. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about the current team, current trajectory. Last season, we come into the season, we had a quarterback who really was not a good passer the previous year. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. I think a lot of people are rooting for him. I was definitely rooting for him because he was a 4-star athlete, comes in, his first pass was memorable against Illinois and yada, yada. But he wasn't getting it done on the field, passing the ball. Legs is a different story. We get Ethan Kaliak-Mattis. He comes in. We think it's going to be a competition. Right after the spring, Gavin leaves, and there's a lot of speculation. It must be because Ethan ran away with the position. I was happy at that point, not necessarily to see a kid not make it, but to see the fact that, hey, this must be decisive. And Ethan Kaliak-Mattis is going to be a difference maker. Kid comes in last season. Look, I know it's Rutgers relative, right? So I'm acting like he's beating the world the way I sound right now. But look, he comes in and he has a respectable season, to say the least. He shows some real moxie and some real heart and leadership, especially in that Illinois game, despite the loss. I mean, he dragged us with Kyle, but he dragged us to the end of that game and set us up to win. Some concerns coming in about maybe being a little bit mistake prone. Saw that in the bowl game at an instance that was inopportune. But for the most part, he was able to kind of stay away from that. So Ethan Kaliakmanis, the other thing I want to say is midway through the season, I want to see if you guys have the same take. I thought that Greg went in with, hey, you have Kyle Monangai. He's a Big Ten leading rusher. He's an excellent player. You can always count on positive yardage with him. We're going to ride that until we can't anymore. You also had some veteran receivers getting the nod early in the season who were okay, but were not as talented. And I think we saw by season's end as the younger receivers and Ian Strong and KJ Duff, these guys were just athletic monsters. I know we saw a little bit of them early in the season, especially with Duff. He had the touchdown early, should have been an interception, but he made it a touchdown. And then he comes and he really emerges. We shifted, I think. The defense is another story, and we'll get to that. But on offense, I think we opened up the offense. We let Ethan start slinging the ball around, and we let him put the ball in the hands of these very talented receivers who, aside from schematics, could just beat you one-on-one or beat you out on the field of play. And I think Ethan had a lot to do with that, his attitude and also his command of the offense. Also, these wide receivers. This year, do you think that trajectory continues? I know we have a stable of running backs, but especially with respect to the offensive line changes, losing Kyle, I think that this offense, from a passing standpoint, could really be prolific. And how do you were you surprised by Ethan and what he did? And what do you expect from him and these receivers this season? How much of our team overall is going to drive right through that quarterback in those wideouts? Mike, I'll start with you.
Man, a lot to touch there. So I did want to say one thing. The timeline of Ethan getting the job last year, it was almost immediately after the spring game. I think it was maybe the next day that Giano announced that Ethan was going to be the starter, and that Gavin then announced his transfer almost immediately afterwards, because the way that the transfer window was set up, like they didn't want to like screw him over essentially. And, they would have loved to have him as a backup, but they wanted to do right by him. So they did name him almost immediately after the spring. Another caveat is I think they did a lot of what they did over the course of the last season out of necessity, and they kind of adapted as they went, because Kyle Monangai was dealing with a lot of injuries last year that were kind of intentionally underreported. A lot of people think he hurt his ribs on a hospital ball that Ethan threw him against either UCLA or Wisconsin on like a little, it wasn't a screen, but it was a short pass, but he had broken ribs, I want to say during the Virginia Tech game. So he had broken a few ribs and was playing through that the whole season and was never really right the whole year. And so I think the trajectory can continue to go up. I think a lot of last year was just they had way more problems than they had problem solvers on the coaching staff, I think. And the personnel did not present a lot of opportunities for problem solving either. And what I mean by that is there was a lot of guys last year who were thrust into roles they weren't prepared to handle, especially along the offensive line, especially along the defensive line. That I don't think they're going to have that issue this year. Like I talked last year about kind of like the concept of when you're having a party, you want to buy more supplies than you expect to need for the party, because God forbid it, rages on past 10 o'clock and it's, midnight, and now you're out of beer and now everybody's just sitting around with nothing to do and they want to leave. And that kind of leaves a bad taste, where I think they have functional depth at almost every position on the roster this year that they didn't last year. You look at the offensive linemen that they brought in, almost every one of those offensive linemen has had significant snaps as a college player and excelled at whatever level they were at, from Justin Cesare to Mishi Giwa, like both those guys, I think could provide some really good depth. Even a guy like Zach Amlin, even though he hasn't played at Illinois, he's been through a college strength and conditioning program for a couple years. So if a guy goes down along the offensive line, I don't think it's going to blow open the offense like it did last year. Like how that Nebraska game was just miserable to watch, because that was the first game without Brian Felter for a full game. And they clearly just didn't have that coordination or that combination set along the offensive line. So I don't think there's going to be any like linchpins that just blow up the team like they did last year. Even a guy like, I think AJ Serace could come in, and if Ethan rolls his ankle, knock on wood, I'm not wishing it upon him, but I think he could come in and still run the offense in a way that I don't think we could do last year. So I don't know. I kind of meandered through that, David. Sorry if I took a lot of.
Oh, quite frankly, I'm just happy we got a Mike analogy right here on Night Watch, and it was very damn on point. Quite frankly, I understood it perfectly. No, it makes sense to me. Last year, I think, was a big pivot, and it was kind of drastic, I think, midway through the season. Now we know what we have, and I guess they're hoping to be more balanced, especially with, I think, will be a little more of a running back by committee at times. Dave, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question that we had with Gavin and Ethan in the first place was who is going to require opponents to defend a larger part of the field? And so my question the whole time was, okay, let's say even Ethan can do this. Our team's just going to stack the box, or are they going to back off? Is it going to give another guy more room? And I made this point on Scarlet Faithful that dropped Monday morning. Was Shiano rarely goes into a game thinking they can't win. And you have to always think that there's a path. But the number of ways that you could win, because he also talks about how games take on their own personalities. He was forced last year to have to adjust what the to adjust to like what they're doing, and there might be more than one way to win this game, and going with it from that standpoint. So I think that's what Ethan brought. And the other thing is if the rest of your team falls apart in a game, as long as your offensive line isn't completely getting destroyed and you have a quarterback and receivers, sometimes that just keeps you in the game.
Yeah.
And that is something we don't realize a lot. Like look at Rutgers when they lost to Nebraska in 2022. Rutgers was dominating that game in every aspect. Nebraska's QB threw 3 picks. But just because he kept chucking it, eventually they got one lucky turnover and a quick touchdown, and then they had one drive the entire game, and they won. And I feel like that is, in the modern day, letting him chuck it around, sometimes that's what happens. So that's where I think, and you'll probably talk more on the crossover episode about Ethan statistically and everything like that. But to me, it's those two things that it gives you have hope. And also that you can make up for other deficiencies on your team when that happens. I mean, look at the 2014 Michigan game, right? Rutgers had no run game at all, but we had good Gary Nova that day, and he was just threw for 400 yards. He avoided a sack from an All-American, Frank Clark, who became a multi-year NFL starter. I still don't know how he got away from that and throws a touchdown.
No one does.
Like sometimes good quarterback and receiver play can just make it happen for you. And that's what I see with Ethan. And again, I'm not saying he doesn't have his floor might be a little lower because he's not like a bruising runner. He's not the perfect guy to throw screen passes like 100% efficiency. But there's a shot, and I think he has the attitude that matches how he plays, which again I think is kind of to your point, Mike. Last year, the attitudes and expectations of coaches, players didn't always mesh like it necessarily needed to.
Yeah, you make a great point. I especially love the intangible part of it, which is, I touched on his moxie, his leadership. He has an intangible. He can be a gunslinger. He can go out there and make things happen when he needs to. What does Ethan need to do before we pivot to defense to kind of wind it down? What does Ethan need to do this year to cement his legacy, and how much of a legacy can he have? Now, look, we could shoot to the moon and talk about, well, he can go undefeated and be the best quarterback in Rutgers history. But realistically speaking, what does Ethan need to do? You could talk about stats. You could talk about wins and losses. You could talk about, just being a difference maker. What, in your guys' opinion, does Ethan need to do? What can he do? What do you expect him to do this season? And how is he going to go down in history if he accomplishes those things that you hope he can do?
You want to take this first?
Yeah, whoever wants to. Dave, you were kind of busy there. We're all multifaceted individuals. We got cats, we got computers.
All right. So I do think, one easy way to, cement yourself in Rutgers history is in the history books. I think there is a path for Ethan to set the single season passing record this year, given the weapons we have, given that we're going to be playing from behind in a lot of these games in all likelihood, where it'll force them to pass the ball more. But I think he can cement himself in Rutgers history as kind of being the stabilizing force the quarterback room needed for the time he was here to allow us to get back on the development path for young quarterbacks, because that is going to be such a huge advantage for AJ Surace next year. He's going to have 3 full years in the system, again, knock on wood, where he has been able to sit behind a guy who knows the offense, who he bounce ideas off of when Kirk Soraka is not in the room, and he can have his master's degree in the offense before he even throws a pass. And ideally, you bring in a kid underneath AJ who could then be that developmental guy who can learn under AJ for 3 years before he has to eventually step on the field. So I think as he could just be like the person who set the direction positively for the quarterback room for maybe even decades to come, if Shiano wants to stick around. Now, is that going to be the case? We'll see. But I do think that Ethan, while he might not, go out and, get us to the playoff, I think his contributions can be felt throughout, the next few decades of Rutgers football on the high end, I guess, because you talk about culture. I was listening to Will Anderson talk on the Chris Long podcast recently, and actually might not have been Will Anderson. There was somebody talking about the running backs room in Alabama and how, when they got in there, Glenn Coffey was like the only dog they had on the roster at the time. And he passed on his work ethic to Mark Ingram, and Mark Ingram passed on his work ethic to Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry passed his work ethic on to another player. So it was kind of like, it just took one guy to say, this is how we're going to do things in this room. And that, went through for the next 15 years in Alabama's running back room. So that's the hope for me, is that Ethan sets that tone for the quarterback room.
It's a hell of an answer, and I 100% agree. That'd be excellent to see too. And I think he's capable of it, given the fact that he's now experienced in this system. He has the OC that he's comfortable with, who wanted him here, wanted him at his last stop. He has the weapons to do it. He has the experience. I would absolutely love to see that, and I do think it's feasible. Dave, what's your take on that and in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a right thing to just talk about these legacy conversations and what could be. I think that's an important part of storytelling about the history of a program, because I always said the same thing, even when we were writing it on the banks, Larry, is who was going to be that guy? Who was the Brian Leonard? Who was the next one? But we remember that. But from what Ethan, that he's not that, right? He's not a 6'2", 230-pound guy who could have played any position on the field other than maybe D tackle and been good. But what he is we need him to be maybe a slightly better Ryan Hart, because Ryan Hart, yeah, maybe he led the Big East in interceptions twice, but on his arm and his attitude, and I think the attitude's important, was like you felt like, hey, he's going to chuck the ball around and we're going to go down fighting. And that ultimately he allowed him to pass the torch to Mike Teal, who was your 6'4", prototypical at that time NFL pocket passer type, guy who was just, became what he became. And I wouldn't call it necessarily a bridge quarterback, because I think Aiden's better than your Alex Smith game manager. Because people talk about how Alex Smith was doing it for what they thought was going to be Kaepernick in San Francisco, and then what became Mahomes in Kansas City. I think Ethan's a little better than that relative to the college game. But a lot of it is those guys who kind of help elevate the program. And again, I think Bridge would be underselling it if he's going to end up potentially setting the school single season passing record for that sense. But I think his attitude, it seems like he's friendly with all the other guys in the team, and you need your quarterback to be that guy, to be this open door, anybody can come talk to me, I'm a friendly guy, and I'm also a hard worker, but also not too uptight. And I think that Ethan has shown that, and his ability to kind of shake off that fumble against Illinois, when if he didn't make that fumble, they might have just ran away with it, and then come back later in that game and make plays. Even in the Kansas State game, he makes that bad pick, and he slips on that scramble on the final drive. If he doesn't slip on the field, maybe we're having a completely different conversation. And I think he has those elements that, he's not going to go down in the Mount Rushmore of Rutgers quarterbacks, I don't think, unless he throws for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. But I do think that this is an important part and a memorable building block guy that will be remembered for that. if he can lead the team to a successful season in 2025.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think also we're not going to delve too much. We'll do it on TKR show. We've done it on other shows with the receiver talent. I really believe in some of these kids and their abilities, and I think he's going to also have them as weapons. So we'll see how far he can go. But let's pivot to the defense now, because this is my biggest concern, quite frankly. And Dave, you touched on it this morning. We're talking about some of the guys on the line and Walker and these things that had crossed my mind as well, which I'm intrigued just to see who steps up and who can emerge and maybe change my perception, because it's possible. But here's the thing. One of the things you need to emerge and to have cohesion and to adapt is on the staff, you need somebody at the helm who you believe can really do that. Now, I'm not disparaging Rob Smith at all, but I think we all know that a few years ago when Smith was, he moved on, and we get Joe Harris-Simiak in, I think it's recognized widely by analysts and fans alike as one of the better moves and one of the most pivotal staff moves of Schiano 2.0. And you got Joe Harris-Simiak here. The team took a step up in terms of the defense and, the coaching on the defensive side of the ball. Joe moves on, which is a good sign for the program, but we go through an extended search for defensive coordinator, all these rumors. Zach Sparber comes on. He's announced first as a co-defensive coordinator. My suspicions were, maybe he's going to be more of the innovative young architect, but Greg can't hand him the reins. You go out and get Rob Smith. Rob Smith, to me, I don't remember a ton of effectiveness in his last stint here. And so with already the personnel changes and the linebacker issues that we kind of had last. Now, guys are going to have more experience this year, and they're talented guys. But with all that considered, how concerned are you versus how confident are you in this defensive coaching staff now under Rob Smith? How much is Sparber going to be involved? How much do we care? How much does it matter? How much did Smith learn? How much does it change losing that key staff member in Joe Harris-Simiak, and how much does that figure into our overall concerns for the season? I'll go to you, Dave, first on that, and then we'll go to Mike.
All right, so the Harris-Simiak thing, again, my insider knowledge is not from when he was coaching Rutgers, but from when we were kids. And he always was able to convey the confidence and that borderline swagger without being like causing fights with another team type of. He really just intuitively, from the time we were 7 years old, was able to just toe that line perfectly. And a lot of that is just kind of a natural thing. Again, he was always that way. But when you have that, you kind of need your players to be right there also. So sometimes you'll see the cheerleader coach has to do that when they have players who are maybe more of the roster that Rutgers had last year. Maybe that mattered, right? Whereas like Harris-Simiak, when he had Mo Toure, he had the same thing. Like Mo was a leader. He was a beast. He had this aggression and intensity, but he wasn't like taking cheap shots or he didn't have to do that. He just naturally towed that line. And when I look at Rob Smith, he's more of the nerd type coach, in the sense that like he sees like these are the advantages that we can have here and there. And this is what's going to give a boost. So if you have players that can kind of be self-starters, then and players that bring their own like intensity, whether it be in the weight room, in the film room, and everything like that, then that kind of balances it with Rob Smith. Whereas like they're kind of polar opposites. I mean, the last thing anyone would describe Joe Harris-Simiak is as a nerd, right? In terms of like this minor little thing, this tight end is gonna move 3 yards this way, and if we do, like, that's not how he was. And so I think what Schiano is trying to do now is trying to balance maybe what you're getting with Sparber and Smith, that they can work together, but that you're not putting yourself in a corner where like it just might not work out from a cohesion standpoint throughout the entire defensive players and coaching staff. And so that, again, I think it matters. Your question is, how much does it matter? It's hard to say because every team's different. Maybe you won't be in games where that matters as much. Maybe you won't have injuries, so you don't have to deal with all these other aspects. But I think last year they were so focused on like who can play that the coaches couldn't deal with these sort of peripheral like elements to coaching their team on that side of the ball, because they had to just focus like, can this guy play? This is our game plan if he plays. This is our game plan if he doesn't play. Never mind like the psychology of this, that, or the other thing. And that's really where it's a potentially reason for optimism, even though the coaching search took a long time. You didn't get like a superstar, but you're trying to fill in the gaps with like what might work best for this team.
Right.
Yeah. And kind of to your point, David, like the whole, like what you're basically kind of like alluding to is like, it seems like Joe Harris-Simiak had like a very high EQ, whereas Rob Smith has like a very high IQ. And communication style wise, like Joe Harris-Simiak is going to be, I mean, ultimately as a coach or a teacher. So his ability to communicate is going to, be able to teach concepts in a lot quicker way than maybe a guy like Rob Smith, who can only really see it in one way from what you're kind of describing. So for people who are similarly minded, that learning style is going to be easy. But for kids who are more so like, I need to just see it and do it, like you might not have the versatility to teach in a way. Maybe that's where a guy like Zach Sparber comes in and is able to fill that teaching gap that a guy like Rob Smith might have. And a guy like Sparber, Schiano wanted to hire this offseason, but I don't think he was necessarily trying to hire him at maybe a coordinator level. I think he was maybe saw the opportunity for him to grow into that role. But James Madison was ready to hire Sparber as their replacement DC for Liam Hemphill, who ended up leaving JMU to be an analyst, I think, at Texas A&M, who I was really high on, but regardless. I think one telling thing, and I think Schiano is, as we all know, very intentional with the things he says, doesn't say, the way he says things, the verbiage he uses. Schiano went out of his way this training camp, and I don't remember who he was doing an interview with, whether it was with BTN or whether it was with, one of the news stations where he's a little bit more candid, but he's very like, remember when Toure left, he like mentioned, he was a great player for us, but we're moving on. We're dealing with who's here and blah, blah, blah. Like he's very quick to like detach himself from people who are choosing to no longer be with the program. Like guy with Kyle Monangai, he'll talk about him till, the cows come home, because he was a guy who, ended his career with Rutgers. He played his whole career at Rutgers. Yeah. But he went out of his way to say that the team really misses Joe Harris-Simiak. And this was like less than a month ago. Now, for him to go out there and say that, I think is telling that maybe the defense isn't quite where they want it to be right now. Maybe they'll play themselves into that. And that's something Schiano also said in one of his recent training or his recent pressers. Was somebody asked about how they thought the D-line was coming along, and he took a really long time to answer. And he basically said, like, we won't really know what we have in the defensive line until we actually play some games, because we only do live tackling during scrimmages, and there's a lot that you kind of have to figure out as you go. And David, do you want to just kind of like talk through that? Because you're one of the better ball knowers that I know. So do you want to talk about why you might not know what you have on a defensive line until you actually play some games?
Yeah, well, this was talked about on a couple different podcasts. It might have been yours as well. Might have even been Bobby Darin. Like defense, or Brian Doan, it could have been any of them. Like defensive line in practice, you are the least involved in like overall practice, to say the least, right? Because there's a lot of 7-on-7s that happen and things like that, where you do your one-on-ones with the O-line, but like we had a guy who was a practice hero who, because there's nobody next to you, he would just like kind of run around the offensive line and like, this is pointless. Like this doesn't translate. And the coach was like, he's really good. Whereas the rest of us almost like had respect for our co-team member. I'm not going to just make an offensive lineman look bad because he's kind of like maybe a guard or something and just like run around him. Like that doesn't accomplish anything for me, for him, for anything. So, and then a lot of the drills you do are like, we almost did like karate drills sometimes, where like you would just put your hands on a guy's shoulder and like they would be try as many different ways as you could to dislodge yourself. So any guy with like wrestling training, jiu-jitsu training was like really good at that type of thing. And some guys would be good at it in a drill setting, but maybe not in a game. Right. And so there's all these drills that you do, but they're not really in the context of actual football. Even your warm-up tackling drills where like you would go like from sideline to sideline pre-game or in a practice, and like you kind of run and you lift the guy up or like things. You can't tell until the lights come on like how good a guy is. That's part of it. The other part of it is like some guys, like you talk about in baseball, like in the clutch. Some guys, there's like a new gear happens in a clutch situation. Some guys wilt under the pressure, and most guys are kind of like right where they are. And you don't really know until, and with so many new faces in a new system, it's hard to tell. Like, whereas like Keshawn Griffin, I'm pretty sure I know what his floor is because of how well he played last year. And he'll be probably in a roughly the same position. Maybe Zaire Ngoy, maybe too, but maybe with some less weight. Maybe he's less stout against the run. Maybe he has a pass rush. I don't know. But there's all these like things that happen where if you're not live tackling, and this is what I was saying about Eric O'Neal as well, like on tape, he's a good finisher. Like when he actually gets to the quarterback, he takes him down. He must have really strong hands, like type of thing, but you can't hit the QB in practice. So you don't know, like, even if you blow it dead, like, was this guy going to actually finish the play? Or is it going to be Eli Manning sneaking out of it at the last second and completing a pass to David Tyree in the Super Bowl? Like, you don't know which of your guys on the defensive line are finishers like that. And that's where, even Walker in a small sample size is good from what I saw, but, he was better than I thought. But you don't really know if he has to be your, like, premium guy. Like, is that how it's going to work? And I think that's where that's not necessarily ties to the Harris-Simiak thing, but in terms of explaining why practice is hard to replicate, whereas like DBs and receivers, even if they're not tackling, you can tell if a guy's not going to pass away. You can tell, like, is he a good route runner and those sorts of things. Even defensive line, like you can do stunts in practice, but it's not the same as even going thud isn't the same as going live hitting. And so that's where, when we talked previously back to the schedule, is like, this is a good reason for Rutgers not to necessarily have to play like a premium team, like opening kickoff. Let's say they're playing like Ole Miss or something in this first game of the season. Like, yeah, you want that because you might be able to sneak an upset, but at the same time, like, you have no idea. You could get blown out. And this hopefully sets you up that you can learn some of those things about your team in that way and kind of build on it. I know that's maybe a lot of examples, but those are all the things that you do in practice. And it's only a very short period of practice where defensive line is anything even close to live. And that's nothing compared to an actual like full blown scrimmage, which I think they only had 2 this year. So that kind of goes to it. Yeah. And then, in terms of like missing Harris-Simiak, I didn't think about it as much as you did, Mike, in that sense. But again, I think Harris-Simiak is very much like old school Schiano of like, this is what we're doing. And like, he had a pretty good gauge as to maybe a little bit too long of a leash before we try to do something in a completely different way. Like, we're going to get a pass rusher forward. That's what we're going to do. That's what he did at Maine, and it worked. And they just didn't have the horses for that. But I don't know. Like, I don't know if Rob Smith is going to try to have more ideas than he has in the past, if they're going to try to change things up. I really don't know what that is. But the one thing I was thinking, I want to get your guys' take on, was like, I was thinking about the dark side last night.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the point of that was because of the personnel were not these like swagger guys that like, well, that's not our style. Our style is like, we're the Death Star. Like, we know what we're doing. We don't need people to pat us on the back, and we're going to have success. And I think that that's what they were trying to do, and it just didn't hit like we wanted it to. And so I'm curious, like, do you think Mike, when you said that, do you think he means like they're missing the dark side, like that trying to way to frame things? Or is there some other element that, maybe Harris-Simiak did compared to Rod Smith when he first joined, when we're comparing them side by side? Or Larry, I mean, we never talked about this on any of our podcasts either. Like, what is it? Like, what does a defense need in that sense?
I think, I think they were trying, exactly like you're saying, also searching for an identity. We're going to be just a cohesive unit. The whole dark side is going to come out. But I think it was also just some of the connotation of the dark side, like we're seeking you out, we're tough, we're kind of tapping into our aggression to come after you. And it was an attempt at a cultural, step forward with that defense. I think it worked better. And I think we all know that 2 years ago, the injuries last year just stacked up to a point where Schiano, I think, said it perfectly. I believe what he said, which was we started trying to plug one hole, and then we got sidetracked because you plug this hole, then you plug that hole, and before you know it, you're way off track. We had to recalibrate and look at how we functioned as a unit. And I wonder if they maintain that same, identity, dark side, the musical. I think it was a way to get them hyped and say, you had the no-name defense. You have all these, the steel curtain. You have all these defenses where, hey, maybe not one individual is a superstar. And you had longer beaming these guys who were Tyreen, even though he was banged up. But as a unit, we want to be known as something. When you come up against us, you're going to feel it. And I think that's where it was. And I want to ask Mike's opinion, too, on the fact that, to kind of pivot as well, but stay on this lane, Rutgers, at a certain point in Schiano 1.0, my reading of it, or memory anyway, was there were certain deficiencies Rutgers was going to have, but they made up for it with X's and O innovation. You use speed instead of size sometimes. You tweaked the defense. You had the R rush position. You had these other things going on to make up for other things that if you lined up helmet on helmet, you might not always succeed. We started to become a real force in turnovers, creating opportunities for turnovers, and everybody preaches it, but Rutgers did it. Getting to the quarterback, making things happen. We've struggled with closing the last few years. No matter how many pressures we've gotten, we've struggled to seal the deal. And the other thing, I know it's a little bit out of that lane, but the special teams was such an emphasis because it was an X factor for a team that otherwise was kind of punching up in weight class sometimes. This iteration of Schiano with the defense and with special teams I've seen, I know he's going to put the emphasis, and if you ask him, he'd say he'd love to have those X factors. But is that something that is really permeating, the philosophies and cultures of defense and special teams now? How much does Schiano, I know he now takes more of a backseat and he's more of an administrator, delegates responsibility, which I think is overall a good thing. But how much does he need to lean into it? How much are we ever going to see that again? Or have we just now turned the page, matured, a new iteration where we're going to go helmet to helmet as best we can, and finding those little advantages are not going to be as tenable anymore? Mike, you could answer the dark side thing too, but that was kind of a question I wanted to get to for this season and beyond.
Yeah, I'll start with the whole missing Harris-Simiak thing. I think Harris-Simiak and Schiano, like you kind of alluded to, David, they think very similarly. They're extremely detail-oriented. I don't think there was really anything that got past Joe Harris-Simiak that he hadn't already kind of developed a plan for like Schiano would. So Schiano could basically just like fully entrust that Harris-Simiak had whatever he needed to do on the defense, the same way he fully trusts Kirk Soraka on offense. I think that freed up a lot of mental capacity for Schiano to kind of focus on other things, like, for one example, generating NIL funds for the football program. But I think last year, due to all the injuries, they kind of were forced to make a really tough choice between, do we play players who are inexperienced, take our lumps now, or try and play guys at 70% and hope that they can fight through the pain? And when you have a bunch of guys playing at 70% or less, you can't win like that. And so I think Schiano learned a valuable lesson where we need to take our lumps when needed and let those guys get healthy for the back part of the season rather than try and play through it. Because, in 2023, I think you've used this term before, David, where the defense kind of played like on a string, like everybody moved together. Everybody knew exactly where they're supposed to be at all times on basically any plays. And that's why we didn't allow any big plays until that Travion Henderson dump off pass. And that was after Tyreen Powell got hurt, one of their, best players. And so they didn't have the ability to play as a unit last year because they kind of made some bad decisions with regard to injury. And then they played guys with inexperience too late. So you're basically like, we're doing both by the time it came down to it. So you kind of screwed yourself both ways. So I think that's a combination of why 2014 happened the way it did was, they decided to have guys play through injuries rather than, the Motoré thing to start didn't help either because he was that potential X factor where he could, like, they were probably planning to use packages on defense. They just threw out the window when Motoré got hurt because he was a guy who could play off the ball. He could be a legitimate elite edge defender, or not edge defender, a pass rusher and run stopper. Like, when you lose that, you lose like essentially like, your nuclear missile in your arsenal for the Army. So when you don't have that, I think there was just like a confluence of a lot of things that went wrong, but there was also some decision making that I feel like if Schiano could go back, he would probably change the way he did things. And And I also wanted to point out a poster boy for the not turning pressures into sacks. Like Aaron Lewis, it was either in like 22 or 21. He like led the Big Ten in pressures and he had like maybe 3 sacks. Like he just was not a guy who could finish. He was a guy who like, he probably was really good at like the one-on-one drills in practice where he could beat a tackle a lot, but punching a bag down is not the same as actually dragging a quarterback down.
Makes sense.
Sorry, that was pretty long.
No, it makes sense. Dave, and also the X Factor stuff with Schiano.
So I think it's a thing that happens to everybody in life. I mean, this is one of the movie example. Like Rocky is such a great movie series because in each episode of it, he had to learn a new part of it. And like in Rocky 3, when Mick says to him, the worst thing that happened to you that could happen to any fighter, basically you got soft, like in a sense, like you got civilized is the word he used. And a big part of college football is if you show up and you want to hit the other team in the mouth that day and they don't, then a lot of times you're going to win. And I think special teams and defense played into that a lot. And just the mentality of like, we're good enough now that we don't have to do that. But, it goes back to like all these other sports. Like if LeBron James is out there, because I use a baseball example, I use a basketball example today. Like LeBron James just powering it down your throat, like versus him. Yeah, he can shoot threes and sometimes he's hot, but that's not the same as, or Michael Jordan, same thing. Like, as this guy's coming downhill. We gotta stop him. And like the rest of the team kind of feeds on that, even though like, yeah, Michael Jordan could have spent the entire game just shooting like free throw line jumpers over people and like scored the same amount of points. But it's the idea of like, you're taking it to them. And I think that is Rutgers lost that with a lot of those elements. Like Larry, we talked about this when you asked me about Schiano 1.0, like how did they get so good? And yeah, there were some tactical things that they did, and they were willing to give up big plays. I think with the Harris-Simiak example, when you look at that Washington game, like Mike, you pointed out, they were outgained by 200 plus yards, time of possession, all these sort of things. Nothing would tell you that Rutgers should have won that game. But what they were doing was they were dictating to Washington, like, okay, we know that this defense is going to cause them to throw it to this guy on an intermediate route on the right side. And like everyone knows that. Washington knows it. They're going to have to do it because it gets them 5 yards. But then the entire cavalry is coming over there to tackle that guy because like everybody on both sides knows this is where this ball is going to go. And let's meet at the point of attack. And like, let's see who hits each other. And Washington blinked a few times on those, most notably that Kyle Monungai run from outside of the inside their like 5 yard line or 10 yard line. Like they didn't want to tackle him. And Michigan State was similar. Like Rutgers they didn't want to tackle Rutgers, even though Michigan State had literally everything to play for in the sense of a bowl game and Rutgers had nothing to. And I think the special teams and defensive attitude matters. You have to be willing to blitz and maybe give up a big play because the potential payoff of that is higher, that maybe you get a strip sack or maybe not. I mean, the problem last year was they were giving up these big plays without getting turnovers, without getting sacks. And they were kind of getting the worst of both worlds. And that's kind of where I point to, a lot of those big gains last year came on like these like perimeter runs where, to your point, Mike, they didn't happen the year before. Like if a lane was filled, the guy was going down, or at least he'd be slowed down long enough that help would come. Whereas last year, I mean, guys were just running free. And that's where you either have to be the cohesive unit or you have to have guys with enough physical talent, even if they're your backups, that they can chase down somebody and let you live another down. Like I think there was one other play against Kansas State where they had a huge gain, got inside the 5, and Rutgers ended up holding them to a field goal. Like that's a difference in 4 points that you were able to pull this guy down and versus not. And that's where, the coaches have to know. And I was listening to Matt Patricia and Julian Edelman podcast yesterday talking about the Patriots. Every week was kind of like a new thing. Who do we have? What do we do this week? And that's kind of the opposite of what Schiano was saying, was like plugging the hole from what was there last week. No, it's like every week they came in like, this is who we have. And 75% of it is this is who we have. And only 25% is like what the other team's doing. We got to do the best we can. And then, of course, they didn't even mention let's go 1-0 this week. But it's just like that was, I think, not like Schiano probably remembered his Belichick lessons from that, which they didn't necessarily do last year. So I know it was, like, again, a long-winded answer. But it's just comparing side by side, like what was missing and can they get it back is going to be the biggest story on the defense for the 2025 season.
And Dave, yeah, don't worry about long-winded answers, either of you, okay? This is the literary Rutgers sports podcast. We like long answers and analogies and all of these poetic things. So to finish it off, here's what I want to ask both of you. Overall, you could give me a win-loss prediction. You don't have to. What's your feelings on the upcoming season? I will tell you right now, I feel good about the team. I feel better than I thought I would after what I still think is a missed opportunity last season. I think the offense is going to be pretty good. And, you know, I'm a little worried about the O-line, but I do think we have some guys with more Big Ten snaps under their belt who can make a difference there. The team, I think, with the quarterback who's mature and I think is reliable, is one of the biggest engines in the game of football. I don't necessarily know if that translates into serious wins or a great record. I have deep concerns about the defense. I'm pulling for a 500 season and a bowl appearance, and I think that will make me happy. Anything above that would make me very happy. But give me some enjoyable games. I like the way the schedule shook out where we have later kickoffs early in the season. Give me some enjoyable games. Give me a chance to go to a bowl game, and I'm happy. I'm feeling overall positive vibes about the state of the program. That's my take on this season. Mike, what's your take?
The schedule is tough, but it's not the gauntlet I think we're all not everybody. It's not the gauntlet some are making it out to be. Like, I think outside of the Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon game, like at worst, it's a 60-40 proposition for Rutgers in every other game. So
Right.
like the variance could be so wide. Like we could be a 9-3 team. We could be a 4-8 team. I think you guys said that this morning, David, where it's like, you know, it's a lot of coin flips, and it's kind of like, what does this team become? Because preseason rankings are fun and cool, but like they don't really mean anything. Like last year, Florida State entered Dublin ranked in the top 10, I think. And you saw how their season went. Like the preseason rankings, like I don't know what percentage of teams end up unranked or with a losing record, but it's probably like in terms of unranked, probably at least half. So like a team that is ranked to start the season is not necessarily indicative of what that team is on the field. So I do want to put that out there. Like, for example, I don't think Illinois is going to be a top 12 team by the end of the season. I just think they're a little overrated. And I think if they had 9 wins last year instead of 10, like if Rutgers wins that game, I think Illinois might go into the season unranked. And that's the power of one win. So I think Rutgers, if all things break well, this could be a high watermark for the Schiano 2.0 era. It also could be a season that we're looking back and thinking like, how did we, go 5-7? Like I thought we were supposed to be improving, where we do have a better team than a 5-7 record. It's just we have a lot of coin flips on the schedule. So I don't know. I feel good about this team. I think we're a more talented team this year than last year, but it's going to really, can this team transition from a defensively led program to an offensively led program? If they can do it, I think they can kind of hit the ceiling outcome. Whereas if they don't, I think we could be in for a struggle, because I don't think the defense is where Schiano wants it to be at right now. Whereas I think the offense is something that he can't stop smiling about.
Good points.
Yeah, I mean, my season prediction, hopefully if I can record the full crossover episode, we'll talk more game by game with that. Just to your point with the 60-40 games, usually the outcome of 60-40 games is you win between 40 and 60% of them, usually.
Yep.
Sometimes it's not, and it goes totally the wrong way. But I think that this team they have the things in place that avoid the catastrophe. Like AJ, hopefully he can get some snaps early in the year, because Ethan doesn't need the reps like in the fourth quarter if it's a blowout in the first 3 weeks, if they're winning. I'm not saying take him out if they're not. Like if it's close, leave him in. But hopefully, you have that. Your offensive line, you have guys who have played. Even if you don't get anything from Giwa, Amland, Cesare, if you don't get anything from any of them, you still might have enough offensive line guys that you can survive an injury or two quicker than last year when the adjustment. Defensive line, I mean, I think the where you hit your floor is if you just can't stop anybody, either throwing bombs against you or just running up the gut. And I feel like those areas are built up enough under the Schiano 2.0 era that it's less of a concern. So yeah, that's why I'm pretty confident they won't bottom out as badly unless, again, some catastrophe. I mean, like happens off the field or something, like not necessarily Ethan gets hurt like between games and then like you have a week to prepare AJ, but like you're not sure if he can play. Maybe he's 50%. Do you keep him in there? Do you try to put AJ in? Like some of those weird things can happen. Maybe, once in a while, like the Kent State, like Dree Archer game where like this guy just comes out of nowhere and then you have like zillion turnovers, like a worst perfect storm for why Rutgers lost that game to Kent State in 2012. So like those things can happen. But my concern is to hit your ceiling, usually you need to either be able to just maul people in the offensive line at times to just kind of give yourself that cushion and close games out. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to do that against Iowa, Washington, Illinois, maybe Minnesota. Like I don't think you're going to be able to do that. So you're going to have to keep passing the ball, which sets you up for potential risk there. And then pass rush. I don't know. I'm not confident that they have a pass rush that's just going to wreck a few games and make them a laugher, right? And to hit your ceiling, a lot of times you need that so you can kind of take a breather in the second half of a game that, hey, we're punching Purdue, it's 30-0, and now in the second half, maybe it ends up 35-26, but like we were able to not necessarily take our foot off the gas pedal, but like give some of these other guys some reps. Like that's how you hit your ceiling. And I feel like other than the pass game, the other things that give you your high ceiling, maybe the areas Rutgers is lacking, whereas the things that prevent you from having a low floor, I think Rutgers is pretty short up in those areas. And so that's why I think really I'm pretty confident they're going to go somewhere between 5-7 and 7-5. Like I'm pretty confident it's going to be somewhere in there. Exactly which of those games they win versus lose, that may be tough. But if they come out and they beat Iowa, we should be able to think that they're going to go 7-5. And kind of to your point, Mike, 2 years ago, we could talk about this now, but the shifting expectations is a real thing. Like we're human beings. And if they start out 4-0 and they don't finish 7-5 or better, we may view the season as a disappointment. Whereas if, something weird happens and they start out 2-1 and then they finish 5-7 and like are playing these dogfights against Penn State late in the season, we might look at it from a different standpoint in a narrative way, even if the record is the same, but was arrived at in a different way. So
That's
Larry,
fair.
I'm not giving you a definitive answer, but like, I feel like the floor should be pretty high, but the things that have to go right for them to hit their ceiling are the things I'm less confident in with this team.
And to touch on that really quick, like we need to avoid those like months like we've had the last couple of years where we just like fall off. Like last year was October, 2023 it was November, and November I think was more of a fair reason why they did what they did. It was like, I think they played at Iowa, at Penn State. They played, I forget who the other two teams were.
Yeah, it was Ohio State at home, Iowa away, Penn State away, and then they finished with Maryland, and we're just kind of out of gas.
Yeah. So like that made more sense, but October of last year cannot happen again. Like if that happens, then you're going to lose a lot of your fan base. You're going to have so much apathy, same old Rutgers, the same people who come out when Rutgers is not having success are going to come out even louder this year. I thought we were supposed to be, can't even take a step forward. You went 6 and blah, blah, all that bullshit that you're going to expect to hear. Like we just need to avoid a month that like sucks the tide of enthusiasm away from the program that's happened the last few years.
Yeah, and I think it's fair, by the way, to have shifting expectations because you're getting new information. So if you are playing better, then maybe the team is better and capable of more. If other teams are not as good as advertised, then you are capable of more. If you're having some stumbles, then maybe you reset expectations because you're not where you thought you would be. So that's all fair, and I agree with you, Mike, 100%. You can't have one of those long ruts. It just takes the wind out of the sails completely. And the perspective of the season changes. Last year, looking back, I know we ended on a good note, which partly the reason I look at it more positively is from ending on that better note later in the year, still lose the bowl game. The Illinois game still leaves a terrible taste in my mouth. But when we got blown out by Wisconsin, I just think overall the perception of the fan base, like you thought, hey, we're on an upward trajectory. I had Wisconsin fans on this show saying, well, we're having a rough year. We're worried about you guys, and then we get blown out. It resets where you're like, oh, Rutgers again. And I'm hearing from people, oh, same old Rutgers, this and that. So completely agree. You can't have that. I hope we don't. And we'll continue to adjust and readjust expectations as the season moves on. Let's at least get to a bowl game. Guys, most of my listeners know where to find you because you guys are well known, and I really appreciate you coming on the show this morning and chopping it up with me about the season in this format. It was an absolute pleasure, as I'm an avid listener to both of you, obviously. But where can fans find you, both in your known spots or if you're doing anything else that you might want to tell people about?
Well, you can find me on the Night Report podcast. I do some writing for the On3 Rutgers site, but not a whole lot. You can find me on Twitter at Mike Broadbent. We're going to be all getting together hopefully later in the week for a season preview. If you follow any of us, you heard it last year where we review the offense, defense, give some predictions for the season. That was a lot of fun last year. It should be fun this year as well. But that's kind of where you can find my stuff.
Yeah, and Mike's a brilliant man with organizing that hodgepodge, everybody on. So tune in for that. I'm excited about it. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, really, the meat of what I do is the game previews with Aaron on the Scarlet Faithful. We did some collaborations, Larry. We'll see how that shakes out this year. And then I'm at Off Tackle Empire, but Vox Media is making a lot of changes over there. So I'm also at Off Tackle Republic. So it's like going to be a little bit weird as to how that might shake out over the course of the season. But I have 2 full-time jobs. Like I'm a realtor as my second job. So there's not as much time to go around as there used to be. And hopefully it'll be because we're getting together after Rutgers wins, even if it's on a post-game show or something like that. So I'm looking forward to the season. And, you know, for a lot of us, this is the best time of year.
Yes, sir. So absolute pleasure. Make sure you check out the Scarlet Faithful. Make sure you check out the Night Report podcast. They do a great job, and that's where I get a lot of my news as well. Make sure you keep it locked here to Night Watch throughout the season. We're going to have game previews and game discussions, and I will hop on some post-game shows at the Night Report too. So we look forward to the season, and it was an absolute pleasure with you guys. We'll see you soon.
See you, man.